But Jeff is a parishioner here at St. Peter Chanel. He is a outstanding father to his 5 kids, a husband to his wife Lisa, a proud graduate of the University of Georgia, and a fellow fraternity brother of Phi Gamma Delta. So we're very pleased to have him here this morning. Jeff.
There's a lot of accuracy in that. Good morning. I know most of you. I'm going to put this away here. John asked me if I slept well last night, and I said I slept like a baby. I'm not sure. There are more men here than I had anticipated with mayhem going on. Give me 1 second. So I thought I would start. A lot of you were here last month when Alan Hunt spoke. And so, first of all, John and I have control, or some control. I have more influence. He has control over the speaker lineup. And how did I decide to go after Alan? I mean, I could have gone any time this year, and I decided to follow one of the better speakers that we have. So. Besides John, of course, when he gave his talk. But so I get to follow up Alan. You know, the Holy Spirit does have a way of making these things work out. My talk that I've had been reflecting on around legacy really dovetails nicely with what Alan shared last week. And I did mention to Alan that it was ironic that I'm going after him. And I thought he gave a nice remark back. He said, actually, the bald guy never follows the guy with hair. So if you know Alan, that's exactly how he would respond. So what I thought I would do is, I know that some of the guys got a lot out of the talk last week. I think some notes were taken. Alan asked us to reflect on these 8 regrets that Matt Kelly and through Dynamic Catholic, they'd done some research and come up with. These were regrets that men had towards the end of their life. And so I thought we would just revisit them. And then I think one of them or 2 of them might really speak to you. Think about it as I share some reflections on legacy and making an impact in life and through the generations. So I'll just read them real quick. So Alan's Live with No Regrets. I wish I had the courage to be myself. I wish I had made my spiritual life more of a priority. I wish I learned to express my feelings more effectively. I wish I had spent less time worrying about things that never happen. I wish I cared less about what others think. I wish I'd been a better husband. I wish I had pursued dreams. I wish I had taken better care of my health. So those are just some regrets. I think all of us are dealing with those. We're in midstream probably of different points of our lives. But just think about those, and then I'll share some thoughts. So it was August 20th, last fall, 2024, and I knew it was my dad's final day. We had been dealing with his journey through dementia for about a decade, and in reflecting on it, it was a slow, long mourning process for all of us. For me specifically, it's not one sudden moment, but it is a period of time where you are replacing that relationship with other relationships. You're letting go. And we knew my dad had gone through, it was a long illness, but it happened abruptly and very quickly at the end. And it was less emotional at the moment, but very emotional in the process, and then the weeks after, right? So you lose somebody you really care about. A couple stories around that. You know, the day it was happening, my dad my mom called. She said, "Hey, your dad's going to pass." And through that decade of years, I had started to bring other relationships into my life, and a guy named David from work, we were supposed to grab lunch that day. And he calls me at lunch. He's like, "Hey, I'm going to come take you to lunch, and we're going to meet." And I'm like, "David, my dad's literally in hospice. He's about to pass." And David was like, and he's retired, so we don't see each other frequently. He's like, that's fine. Where's the hospice facility? And I said, it's up and coming. He goes, I'm going to meet you at a gas station. I'm going to give you a hug, right? And then go be with your dad. On the way up there, my dad passed, and my mom calls and says, hey, just go on. You got a couple hours. He's going to the funeral home, his body. You got time. So I called David back. I said, let's just grab lunch. So I literally, this guy who had become like a father at work and a really close friend, I got to spend my first, meal, kind of breaking it apart. He knew what my dad had gone through. So that was a kind of a cool moment of replacing a father figure or having another father figure in my life. Another one was, and this is, I think all of us can relate to this, and it's kind of seizing those moments, closure moments. My dad was in this room at the hospice facility, eyes closed. I had not had a real conversation with him in about a decade. And he's laying in the bed, and everybody's out of the room, and I'm like, okay, I need to say something to my dad. And we did not have the relationship that's like, hey, Dad, I love you. You mean so much to me. That just wasn't how we operated. And he's laying there, and I shared with him. I said, hey, Dad, I love you. I'm going to take care of Mom. I thank you for being such a great father and all that. And literally, and I don't know why this happened, a tear rolled down his cheek. I don't know if he knew, he could sense the volume in my voice, but I had not had a conversation with him, and a tear comes down his cheek. So I would just encourage all of you, as you think about some of us have lost loved ones, a lot of us have, and I'm sure you have your own experiences, but I'm glad I did that, right? I got a little closure. So as soon as this happened, I knew that I was going to, what started to weigh on me at least, was I was going to have to give a talk or share some thoughts at the funeral. And I had never experienced this before, didn't really know what to expect, but it started to weigh on me. And so I put my thoughts together. The day comes obviously very quickly. It feels like you're planning a small wedding. And I'm standing in the back of church, and all these people are in line. And you're like, what in the world? Because you don't know who's going to show up for a guy who's been sick for a long time. You don't know what kind of impact, who's going to come to the wedding, to the funeral. And so I start thinking about this, like, okay, we got some people showing up that I know that are friends of our family. And I sit down, and I'm at the front of the church, and up on the altar, I've got a couple priests that have had Monsignor, and a couple other priests that have had a major impact in our family's lives. I got my nephews and my sons on the altar. I'm sitting in the front. I got my family around me, and my dad is sitting next to me in a casket, and our whole community is either in spirit or behind us. It was probably one of the most rich experiences as a Catholic that I've ever had. You just felt like you were in between the spiritual realm and on earth. And it was such, I think it made me really thankful for our faith and the tradition and the sacraments. So that was a cool experience. And what it got me, it really spurred me into reflecting on this concept of legacy, right? And so what occurred to me was all these people showed up, or a decent crowd showed up for this funeral, who had very little relationship with my father, but they were there to support the family, my sisters, myself, and my mom. And that's when it occurred to me, that's a legacy, right? My dad had created a legacy where he had been ill for a long time, but this community was being influenced by what he had done when he was well. And so it really made an impact on me. It made me realize I was his son. I was a son of Christ, and I wanted to do a little more research, right? I felt called to reflect on it a little more. And so as I began to reflect, as a story came to my mind, I did some research. So about 5 years ago, one of the guys brought a case. We bring cases on a weekly basis to our Encounter small group meetings here at the church. And one of the guys, I don't remember if it was Hutkins or somebody, brought the Max Jukes, Jonathan Edwards lasting legacy study. So it's this, basically the gist of the story is there's a guy named Max Jukes, and he was in prison in the 1700s, okay? They studied 42, they found that 42 of his descendants were also in this New York prison system, right? They went on to study 1,000 of his descendants. He was not Christian. He didn't believe in Christianity, and he married a non-Christian. And he was just an overall not a great dude, right? And so they went in, and that's him on the right there. And so these are the two trees. So what they found for Max Jukes is his descendants consisted of 7 murderers, 60 thieves, 190 prostitutes, 44 were wrecked by alcohol, and 300 died prematurely, okay? Contrasting that was a gentleman named Jonathan Edwards in the 1700s, and he was one of the most respected ministers and preachers of his time. He attended Yale. He became the president of Princeton. He married his wife. He had 11 kids. And I thought one of the most powerful things was every night, with those 11 children, he was a busy guy, he would spend an hour conversing and interacting with his family, and then he would pray over each child, right? And so when they studied his tree and what his impact was, they found 1 U.S. vice president, 1 dean of law school, 3 U.S. senators, 3 governors, 3 mayors, 13 college presidents, 30 judges, 60 doctors, 75 military officers, 100 lawyers, 100 clergymen, 285 graduates from college. And so when you just think about that, right, like the impact on society on 2 different individuals, it really, it's huge, right? And that story, I had reflected on that over the years, and I thought I'd revisit it. So what they call it is the 5-generation rule, right? It's the idea that sin, virtue or vice, or good or bad, can go generationally forward. And so then I started thinking, okay, what about nature versus nurture? What about, there is definitely we are born a certain way. And so I did a little more research, and there was a study called the Cherry Blossom Electric Shock Study. So it sounds very, it's on mice, so don't, I don't know if PETA's in the back, but I think this happens pretty regularly. So they took mice, and they put them in a cage, and they put cherry blossoms odor across the cage. And they would then shock the mice, and the mice obviously learned to not like the smell of cherry blossoms. I'm not sure if you guys I think you guys figured that out. So, but the interesting part was the second generation, their pups, they would not shock them, they would just put cherry blossoms odor across the cage. These mice would act agitated, some would be freaked out, but like the reality, they had a heightened sensitivity to it. Those babies also had it changed generationally, but they definitely had a heightened sensitivity to the smell of cherry blossoms. And so the recap of that study was they also dissected the mice's brains, and their brains had added neurons based on this trauma. And so the study basically determined that trauma in someone's life will genetically change the offspring of that person and that spouse. So if you think about that, right, good or bad, but the study had a bunch around like trauma from war. But if you think in your own life, right, like the trauma that we experience as human beings, we are passing that on to our kids. And even more, the person you are had trauma probably generationally in front of you. You did not own some of the characteristics that you have in your own DNA, right? It's from the generations before. And that's fine, right? I'm just saying, I felt like it was important it helps to understand how this works, right? And what the impact is when we're thinking about legacy. So as I did that brief research, and then I knew I had to give this talk, and I started to think about, okay, first of all, I want to share a couple ideas. I picked out 3 themes, and I'm coming at this from a complete place of humility. I have not figured this out, right? I am midstream. I've got a 20-year-old, 10-year-old, and I got a wife, as John shared. I don't have 5 wives, by the way. I only have 1. This is not a talk on that. So what I tried to think through it, and the three themes that I came up with were living a long game approach to life, becoming self-aware, knowing who you are, and then finally figuring out how to have courage to and have fire to really, in the Bible they talk about he spits out the lukewarm, and Christ wants people who are on fire. And so I thought those three themes, I'm going to give you guys a few concepts to think about, and then we'll wrap up and maybe revisit some of the live with no regrets. So the first topic or point is, living a long game, an ultimate long game, and defining what that is. We had a presentation at work. Most of you have heard of Simon Sinek, and he wrote a book called The Ultimate Long Game. And basically, the premise of his book was companies and businesses or sales teams that are playing a short game compared to a long game often lose, or it's less fulfilling, right? So when you think about a business and a lot of us have worked for publicly traded companies, I've lived in that world. When you are trying to make decisions to make the quarter hit the numbers and make the shareholders happy, it changes the behavior compared to a company that's like, if we get that client, it's great, but if we don't, we'll catch them next year. Or we might sacrifice just a little bit of profit to make a better client experience because we're not as tied to what the shareholders are going to say. And I'm getting a little bit, my story is I now work for a private company, I worked for a public company, so I'm a little biased, but I have seen it in action. And so when you think about anything in life, right, when you're dealing with your family and your kids and your community, when you have the long game defined very distinctly, so for me, get to heaven, be in a 50-year marriage where we actually like each other at the end, have kids that are functioning in this world and have the faith and are productive and to society, I think it's really important to define those and to think about them, right? And then make your day-to-day decisions. We all know that life, I sometimes think of people, and we all feel this way, it's like there's a water hose like just freaking hitting us in the face. You know what I mean? Every day it's just like, and like we have to take that stream of water that is just totally directing our life, and we got to be able to just go like this occasionally, right? Turn it away. Take control. We don't have control, right? Christ has control. The world is out of our control, but we do have the ability to be more proactive and intentional around the way we're making decisions, raising our families or working on a daily basis. So I think the first thing to do is really reflect on that, right? I think some people more naturally think about where am I trying to go? And I think defining that as a family and as an individual is really important. I have one quick story on that, just to give you a sense of like that long game. I have a grandfather, we called him Grandpa Weaver. I never met the man. I only heard about him through stories from my grandmother. And he was a guy that lived up in Ohio. I read an article one time about him. He would walk this town carrying his rosary. Everybody knew him, and he was known as a really devout Catholic who shared his faith. And my grandmother talked about him all the time. And he would walk through the cemetery with her, and, it's a good place to reflect on life and what the meaning of life. Well, he had a huge impact on my grandmother, who was the most influential Catholic spiritual person in my life, and her brother, Uncle Buck. Those two individuals were hugely instrumental in creating, my dad converted to Catholicism in college. Then, my sisters and I are living the faith, and now my kids, right? I never met Grandpa Weaver. I don't know where he's buried. I don't know anything else about him. I just have heard stories. When we think about that, right, he's influencing me. My kids don't know him. I haven't talked a lot about him. But like, reflect on us. Like, when you go to a grave site, like most of those people, nobody even knows who they are. We're going to be in the ground. My dad is in the ground, and in 50 years or whatever number of years, no one even knows what that man did. They don't know what he looks like. They don't know anything about him. right? And I think it's really important to think about that sometimes, because we get so tied up in like how important what I'm doing today is, and and we've heard this before, but I mean, when you reflect on it, it's like, done. But we do have the impact. If you go back to that story, right, you have the impact to really influence generations of people, even though they don't know your name. So in closing on that concept, I would just say that measuring, I call it calibrating your decisions. When you think about, hey, should we sign the kids up for this activity? Okay, let me take the water hose off my face, right? And let's think about the impact. Because what will happen a lot of times, the phase of life I'm in, is I'm working and my wife's like, hey, we got to make a decision on what we're doing next fall. And it's like spring. And I'm like, well, okay, I'll get to, let's talk on Thursday night. Whatever happens, life happens. I get home on Friday and she's like, I signed the kids up for like 4 travel sports. What? Well, that's not going to work. Well, can you order pizza? Okay, well, like, can we get the money back? No, it's non-refundable. Crap. And next thing you know, your fall is completely taken, okay? And it could be whatever the activity is, whatever it is. And all I'm saying is, and this is just 101, but like, take the freaking water hose off our face, lead our families, right? Step into it, break a little china, and be intentional around that. So once we define the I thought of a progression, right? You define where you're going, and then we start to figure out, well, crap, I'm kind of broken. I don't really understand why. I'm anxious. I keep failing. I have the same reoccurring issues. I go to confession. I tell Father the same thing over and over again. I keep making my wife mad. Whatever it is. Well, I think there is a journey that Christ wants us to go through. And we aren't just who we are. I think that what I've reflected on is all those little like issues that we have, those are small opportunities for us to embrace the cross and to become more Christ-like. And when you think about the generational sin that we've inherited, that wasn't your choice, right? And some of us have worse things than others, right? You could have really, really bad things that you were born with or born into. It's okay. Actually, Christ gave you those crosses, to figure out how to unpack and potentially grow closer to him, right? Versus like, I really hate who I am. I have it really bad. Why do I have to carry this? Embrace it, right? Everybody could justify, look at what somebody else has compared to what them. So I think what I would suggest is, in the self-awareness, is get a coach, get a spiritual guide, get a band of brothers, and start to get honest feedback and unpack who you are, right? I don't care how old we are, right? You could be you're younger or older, but really going through that process. And I think what it does is it helps us grow closer to Christ. And the little process that we go on this annual retreat, it's the 40-day spiritual exercises condensed into a weekend. But one of the big takeaways, and I've been doing it for a long time, and a few of you have gone with me, or we've gone together. What you do is you pray and you think through what are some of the things that I'm dealing with right now. And it usually kind of coalesces around one vice or something that is kind of a theme in your life. It could be pride. For me, it's usually a nice mixture of pride, sensuality, and maybe a little vanity. And what you do is you determine, how is that manifesting itself in my life? Okay, I'm lazy. I cannot get up in the morning and do a little morning reflection. I can't go exercise in the morning. I always, I'm lazy, or I always talk about myself. Whatever it is, you figure out the manifestations, and then in the program or the plan, you create a counterbalancing list of virtues. So things that are going to help you counteract that. You replace vice with virtue. And you can do that on your own, right? You can figure out at home, what are some things that I'm dealing with? Maybe here's 2 or 3 things I'm going to reflect on daily that are going to help me become a stronger man, care less about people's opinions of me, whatever it is. And so you try to create a counterbalancing virtue. Instead of just removing something, you replace it with something better. So that's just a little, I've been through that process for a number of times. So, this daily battle, I believe, will create virtue, and it will break generational sin. We have the ability to break the Max Juke story, right? And so I think self-awareness is a really key element. You've all been around somebody who has no idea the impact or what they're saying or how they're being perceived. Somebody who's really self-aware and comfortable in who they are, man, it's attractive, right? They're usually really loose and they're comfortable being around you, and they don't. It's very attractive, and I think that's something that's worthy of working on. Final on this self-awareness, I had a priest in confession, and it really spoke to me. So I was talking about an issue. I think I got this under control, Father. It just keeps coming up, and it's not like, it's not like a huge deal. And he was like, Jeff, it's when all men have something that they think that's really okay. It's in the closet. I got this under control. I don't need to talk about it, right? It's fine. Differing levels, and it really could be very innocent. And what he said is, those things, whether they're really bad or just in the beginning, it's up to you. You need to bring them out of the darkness and into the light. Because when you bring things from the darkness to the light, the Holy Spirit can work. When it's in the darkness, you're allowing the devil and Satan, that is where he operates, because you're all by yourself. And so he said, when you bring that out, all of a sudden you start having conversations around, hey, I think I'll just use alcohol for an example, right? I'm fine. I have 2 drinks a night. I'm fine. You start bringing it out and you start talking about, sometimes I feel like I'm too attached to this. I wonder, and you start to talk about it, and what happens is things just happen, right? And you get perspective of other people. Maybe somebody shares with you, hey, you know what, you really are kind of I think you do drink too much, or whatever. It could be a million different things. I'm just saying, bringing it to some buddies and being a little vulnerable, which we are horrible at doing. Maybe sharing it with your wife, also very bad at doing. I think what it does is it just allows air around it and the Holy Spirit. So that really spoke to me, because I'm one of those guys that's like, I got this nice image here. I got everything under control, which I absolutely do not. Anyway, so that's number 2. So long game, become self-aware, right? So you can actually move towards the long game. The last one is, and I think this one's important, and it's one of the struggles. John and I and the teams, it's difficult to work and expand and really make an impact beyond ourselves unless somebody else feels called, right? Feels like, I want to do this. It's hard to force guys even at work, right? Like, how do you get somebody to go sell more widgets if they don't really want to sell widgets, right? They got to want it. And so this last topic is really around, how do you create either the courage or the desire to implement some of these concepts, right? Because now you've become more self-aware, you know where you're going. We're called to be a light on the hilltop. I don't care if you're the biggest introvert on the face of the earth. I don't care if you're the biggest extrovert. All of us are called to be a light to our families and our spouses first, and then in some capacity, influence your neighbor. And that neighbor could be the guy next door, or it could be a million people on a podcast. I don't know what it is. But I think we have to find what that is, and we have to pray the Holy Spirit in adoration, in the sacraments, puts it on our heart to do it, right? To do it well. And I think what happens is we really focus on our jobs, and I'm raising kids, and I got a job, and I'm married. That's my world. Well, in that world, there is a ton of opportunities to be a light to the world. And so I think that when we talk about how do we do that, well, we go back to Father talked about it today. I don't know if you guys heard in his homily. You have to believe in the resurrection. You have to believe that Jesus Christ and heaven is the ultimate destination. And if you believe that and the stories, you start to pray for the Holy Spirit to put the fire in my belly. Make me want to do this, to bring souls with me, my kids. And you got to really want it. Like I'll say, I want to be really holy. I want my kids to be really holy. And I'll just, being a little vulnerable up here, I don't want to be too holy sometimes, right? I don't want to I want to kind of play cool and like bring it up. I'll slide it in at the right moment, right? Or do I really want my kids to be, what if my son has a vocation and he wants to become a priest and, oh gosh, I'll lose him? Or what we really want is our kids to be wealthy, super cool, just the right number of kids, and live down the street from you, right? I mean, that's kind of like the perfect scenario, right? And for John, further away than down the street. I'm just saying, like, you guys, you know what I mean? Like, that's kind of, like, but in that, there should be the ability, it's okay for our kids to be super faithful and have a desire to get to heaven. That really should be, I mean, I would argue, if I die tomorrow, what's more important, right? And so I would just encourage you to really reflect on that. And where's your heart? Where's your heart on it? Because I tell you, the kids know. The kids know where your heart's at. They know you say, we need to go to church on Sunday, but what I really care about is this, right? And I'm just telling you, they are super perceptive. And I think it's important for us, and it applies to work too, right? You say one thing, you do something different, all being authentic. Okay, so as you start to reflect on this, I think a little concept around it is we're not supposed to be in a bubble, right? We're not supposed to be like, okay, I'm in this, I'm going to create this community, because I think you need a community around you in order to be strengthened to go out and be a light in the world and have the courage to do that, right? Because you're going to go out and then you're going to get beat down and you're going to feel alone and the edges get soft. And if it's just you, your wife, and your kids, you're going to come home and at some point you're going to be part of the secular world, right? You're going to be, the river is too strong. So what I would encourage you to do is to create a smaller community, whether that's a small group of men, a few families, some other kids for your kids who are making you better. Not necessarily you being a missionary. You need people around you that are leading the way. And it's hard. It's hard to find those people that you get along with. Your wife likes them, you like them, the kids get along, and oh, by the way, they're being a good influence on us. You got to figure it out. And I would start with a small group of men, because what happens is then you are being fed and recharged, and I'm telling you it works. You're like, okay, so I was dealing with this situation. Oh, he dealt with this situation. Man, I got to do better. Then you go out, and then your battery gets, I'm telling you, your battery starts to go down, right? And before you know it, then you go back, you're like, wow, I got to work on it again. If we do that month after month, day after day, year after year, you are going to create a legacy. You are going to have people that you influenced sprinkled throughout you. Christ will put people in your life, and you don't have to even work that hard. It's just going to happen. And so I would say that if you follow that pattern, you pray for the desire to use your skill, the talents God gave you, to go make an influence, just in a daily, it doesn't have to be frantic. It's just showing up. You're going to create a legacy. So those are the three topics, right? Define your long game, become self-aware, and then have the courage to really implement some of these ideas. And I think if you do that, you're going to really find that you have created a legacy. A couple more things. I just wanted to show this. So my dad was, can you see that? My dad was super OCD. And I mean, like, really OCD. And he would, when he was ill, he was just like, doing stuff, moving stuff around, changing clothes. And he had his wallet. And I mean, he was old school, like that wallet. When I was a kid, it was like this thick, sat in his pants were worn out, the whole thing. All he had, so he would move things in and out. My mom could not find anything, right? I mean, it was like it was bizarre. But anyway, his wallet, she gets it and she's going through it and she's like, I was going through your dad's wallet. Look what was in it. There were 3 things in my dad's wallet. The first was picture of the family, right? Look how folded up it is. Next, I don't know how he fit all that crap in his wallet, but he did. And it's not crap, but it's a crucifix, miraculous medal, religious stuff. And then the last one was where he lives. And I just thought, wow, that's really fitting, right? What was important to my dad, even in his, state of mind? His family, where he was going, right? And where he lived with my mom at home. And for me, I got to be careful not to get emotional, but it was pretty cool, right? That was a pretty cool little moment. I thought I'd share that. Okay, so the last thing I want to do is, this was just a reflection that I did, and I'm going to have you guys, this is like a little bit, this might be a little squishy for you guys, but everybody close your eyes. Think of butterfly. No, I'm just kidding. Close your eyes, take a couple deep breaths, kind of relax, and imagine your funeral. When I think of mine, I think of, obviously, this parish and where we're at. But think about who's in the room. Think about how they feel about your passing, but maybe more importantly, think how do they feel about coming to your funeral about each other, maybe your kids? What's their relationship like? A couple thoughts on death. I heard someone say, you always do it alone. So you always go from the death moment to whatever's next, all by yourself. You often die the way you lived. The relationship you created with God through life typically doesn't change at death. Think about the finality. Have you thought about the reality of hell? Complete darkness, separated from everything we love for eternity. At that moment, what would that feel like? Or Christ waiting, smiling with your family and Mary and all the angels welcoming you. I think these are worthy things to think about occasionally. And I would encourage you to do it on your own in the future. So I'm going to flip back to these 8 regrets. And maybe what we do is now that we've had a little more time to think about them from last month, and now I've given some thoughts, maybe we revisit them and see if anything comes to you from a different perspective. We'll spend a few minutes doing that and then close out. Do we have time? Are we okay on time?